Hi, this is Eldon Cole, University of Missouri Extension Field Specialist in Livestock. Today we'd like to visit with you about the Missouri Steer Feed Out. This is a program that really isn't very new. We've been doing it since 1981 in different locations throughout Missouri, Oklahoma, and more recently in Iowa. Helping us at the Joplin location where we load cattle out have been Patrick Davis and Andy McCarkle, their extension specialists also here in the region, and Daniel Mallory helps out over in Northeast Missouri at Paris. I realize that most of us in southern Missouri kind of think of ourselves as producers of lots of grass, lots of forage, and we know how to run cattle on pasture. However, how many of you really know what goes on once your calves leave the farm and hit the feedlot? They're going to be experiencing a whole new way of life, you might say, once they get to in this case, into Iowa. So we're going to kind of show you a few of the things that we think would kind of help you understand what you're doing to your cattle that might affect their ultimate end. We have the steer feed out with some various phases to it. One of the first phases in the southwest part of the state is to have the cattle all congregate in November at the Joplin Regional Stockyards. We have usually a panel of 3 evaluators who are going to help tell you what the industry thinks of your cattle. Now, that may seem to be a little bit of a daunting experience, and some of you may not like it. They don't pull any punches. If they see something they like, they'll tell you. If they see some problems with your cattle, when they run through the ring, they're also going to tell you. Most recently, last November, we had Jody Pitcock from USDA up at St. Joe, the USDA grader. Jody gave his thoughts and put a price on the cattle. Jackie Moore, of course, from Joplin Regional Stockyards, he's usually one of the panelists, and he will explain what he sees about those cattle from his perspective as a marketer. And then we used Chip Kemp with the American Simmental Association last year, and Chip gave his thoughts and certainly added a little different perspective since he is not a marketer as such. During the time since 1981, we've had 369 different farms represented in the feed out. That totals about 7,850 head of steers. And we even had heifers there for a while back when we were doing the feed out up near Appleton City. But there wasn't enough consistently people wanting to do these heifers, so we kind of dropped them and have just now confined ourselves to feeding steers. We try to run 2 groups per year, those for winter spring calves and those that calve in the fall or the latter part of the year. If you have cattle that are born in that July to November time frame, we usually load those cattle out the first Tuesday in June. If you have cattle that are being born, say, the first half of the year, first usually 4 months of the year, then those cattle are weighed out the first Tuesday in November, and that will be our next pickup date is the first Tuesday in November. I believe that's November the 3rd. And the entry deadline for that is October 10. We have a minimum of 5 head. And if you have a larger cow herd, certainly if you've got 500 cows, don't just send us 5 head. We like to take in maybe roughly 20% of your steer calf crop to get a good cross section of what you're producing. The entry fee is $20 per head up front. In other words, by October 10, when you send in your entry for this fall, we want you to send along $20 per head. Now, the $20 per head is the only upfront money you're going to have to pay. All other expenses that you have experienced and that your steers have experienced in Iowa will be deducted from your final paycheck. This is certainly a little different deal than most of you have had if you're selling or feeding cattle in a feedlot out in Kansas, Nebraska, or somewhere else. Usually there they want their money every 2 weeks to feed them. But we accept them, and they've got arrangements made where you do not need to worry about getting that. In fact, you can even get a cash advance if you have at least 10 head or more. All right, once we get the cattle to our sale facility, in this case, Joplin Regional, we have each owner run their cattle through the ring, and we explain a little bit about the cattle, their sire, what his strengths and weaknesses are. We might talk a little bit about the weight. Certainly, we're looking here at a set of calves that came in last November, and they were from Vandalfsen Farms at Reeds. They weighed 488 pounds, and being a dairy cross, they presented some real challenges to our graders and evaluators as to, well, how do we set these in price-wise? Typically, we want them priced the way any cattle would be that were sold as feeders the previous day at JRS. These cattle, of course, were a little unique with their half Jersey and Holstein dams that they had. The sire of this particular group was an AI bull, old Hereford, that apparently added some pretty good characteristics to his offspring. But you can kind of see the comments that the evaluators made as these cattle were in the ring last November. Jackie, for instance, said, they're going to be hard to sell. I only like cattle that make money, and these will probably make money if you can keep them healthy, because they were undervalued. In fact, they only priced them in at $100 100 weight. And he said they'll be fat by the time they're 1,150 pounds. You know what? Those rascals finished and were sold in July at 1,156 pounds. So I think the COVID situation helped these out. Normally, we'd have been wanting to sell them probably at the 1st of June, but here they got an extra 6 weeks to put on weight and to add some quality to their carcass. Well, that's what we do when we get the cattle in at the receiving point. Now, in the spring, as the cattle are nearing finish, I go out to Iowa and with a camera, take lots of pictures to let you know how the cattle look. You're welcome to go to the feedlot anytime and see the cattle. You can call the lot owner, and we try to make it possible that there is a good communications between you and the feedlot owner. And this 2 calves that we're looking at here are what the Vandalfsen cattle looked like back in, I think it was around the 10th of May that we took pictures this year. And these 2 guys, you can see average daily gain, 3.04 on the one on the left, 3.57 on the one on the right, and choice minus was the final quality grade on the one on the left. And this rascal over on the right, he made low prime, and that was kind of a surprise to a lot of the people who have attended our feed out finale. Profitability, both of these cattle made some money. In fact, just a little over $200 a head was their net profit. Now, overall, the cattle in the feed out did not make a profit. This was the only group that, as an owner's group, they were the only one that showed a profit. and the profit was $61.63 per head. Their mates, this is the kind of the other extreme. These didn't come out looking so well. Their gain, certainly the brindle calf on the left was a little bit slower in gaining, 2.4. Didn't make choice even. He was a select minus, did have a high cutability, and ended up losing $41 per head. As a group, the Vandalfsen cattle averaged 2.99 pounds a day, and we sure like cattle to gain over 3, 4, somewhere along in there is typically what we'll see the overall groups doing year in and year out. Now, the little mottled black face calf over on the right had a pretty respectable daily gain, and he made straight choice. Moving on to another group that came in that had some pretty interesting credentials we'll share with you were these calves from Ronnie Veith down at Purdy. They weighed 570 starting out last November. They were priced at $1.39. They're out of Hereford and Angus sires and Simmental-based cows. They were called medium frame number 2 muscle cattle. Comments there were, as you can read, they're a little full. Color variability will hurt them. They've got one old calf in there that looks like he's a straight Hereford. You can kind of see him just the top of his back. Chip said the variability doesn't end with the color. You see a lot of differences in the carcass too. There's also more variation in them than what first meets the eye. And finally, Jackie said they're in good condition for selling here. The one more straight Hereford looking one might hurt their average a little bit. Here's how those cattle performed. And the calf on the left, the Baldy, he was the fastest gaining steer in the whole bunch at 4.55 pounds a day. We really like for him to beat 4 pounds a day, as he did. He was a premium choice plus, if you will, with a 2.84 yield grade. Has some great credentials that he put up in the feedlot and on the rail. Profit and loss, he was our most profitable steer in the whole bunch at roughly $220 a head. He was first in average daily gain, and he ranked first in retail value per days on feed. He also ranked 4th out of all of them in retail value per days of age, and he graded well enough that he was a certified Angus beef. So certainly he's the kind of steer that you think maybe you do deserve a premium if you put a whole set of cattle like him in the ring at one time. A fellow pen mate from Ronnie was a 4 pound a day gainer also, made low choice, kind of average on yield grade. His profit and loss was not quite as good as the previous calf. He lost $37 a head. Remember I mentioned that Hereford steer. Here he is on the left now, gained 3.6, very admirable. Prime minus was his final grade. He did have a little more fat on him than you probably would like, but not all that bad. He wasn't penalized in any way. He did have a 4.3 yield grade, and he did not end up making a lot of money, but he was certainly better than you might have thought. So you can't always tell that book by the cover. You got to look beneath the hide to really evaluate them. The black steer over on the right, he gained 3.76 and was a choice plus, which is pretty darn good. 2.65 yield grade, again, very excellent, made $87 a head. Third ranking steer out of 122 on retail value per days on feed, and on retail value per days of age, he was 7th out of the 122 that finished it. And that retail value per day of age pretty well tells you that this calf did not have a bad day from the day he was born until the day he went to the packing plant. Duane Walker from Neosho had this group of 700-pound cattle that were priced in at $1.42. They were medium and large ones and number twos as far as muscle thickness. Now, they are out of Brangus cows, out of a Hereford bull, horned Hereford, I believe Duane told us. And here are the comments you might want to pay a little bit of attention to. These are the type they want in Nebraska. They have pounds and yield, according to Jackie, and they might not be at the time they're killed. He says, I can ship them almost anywhere and make them successful. How did they do individually? Well, you can kind of look up there. They were one of, in fact, they were the fastest gaining steers in the bunch at 3.68 pounds for the group. The one on the left, he was a 4-pound a day gainer. Didn't make choice. He was a high select. He did have a reasonably good yield grade. Profit was $59, and he was one of the better gains on feed in the feedlot. The other steer over on the right, kind of the same story, 3.7 gain and low choice with a 2 yield grade. And kind of wrapping up Walker's cattle, 40% of them did make choice out of his group and 40% yield grade 1s and 2s. So they kind of fell in there among the average. The calf we have over here on the right, for various reasons, his performance overall in the feedlot did cause him to lose about $300 during the feeding phase. This may have been partly due to sickness that he was treated for. Various things like that can impact it. In fact, over the years, when you put cattle in the feedlot, you might as well expect that from one extreme to the other. If you only have 5 head, you're likely to see from the best to the worst, maybe a $250, $300 variance from one animal to the next. Okay, I believe this is the last group we're going to take a look at, but again, it shows some of the variation that we have. These steers, there were 12 of them. They come from Carrier's Muddy Creek Angus up at Lockwood. Pretty heavy calves going in at $7.70, priced at $1.47, so they didn't penalize them very much. They were medium and large frames, and most of them were 1s with a few 2s on muscle thickness. Jody, our USDA grader, said they were full and a couple looked staggy, and that hurt them a little bit. Of course, if you're a purebred breeder, you might castrate some of these cattle a little later than normal, and that could have resulted in why they was a little rough-headed and looked a little staggy. Chip commented, being long-weaned is a big plus. Remember now, if you're selling cattle, 45-day pre-weaning before they go to the market is an advantage. They've got some stretch on them, well muscled, great potential in the feedlot. And Jackie says they're the type we like. They're big, they're black, and easy to sell. Individually, I think the thing that stands out on these 12 head, and by the way, these were half brothers, all out of the same sire, we can see that there's some profit here. And I think the outstanding thing is 10 of the 12 graded low prime or into the medium prime range. That's pretty striking. So I think when we kind of go through the groups like we have, that gives you a pretty good rundown of what goes on at a steer feed out. I always tell people when we start the feed out program, I won't guarantee you that you're going to make any money, but I will guarantee you that you will come away with more information to help you evaluate changes that you might need to make in your breeding and your management and probably your health program. We do seem to have sickness shows up in our feed out cattle, just like anybody will have if you're sending cattle to a lot for somebody else to take care of, they're going to do their best, but there will still be some sickness. We had a few cattle that didn't show any sickness, no treatment at all, and that is what we like to see when we put cattle through the Missouri steer feed out.